afraid to rename or do anything until I know what's going on. Because usually the council chambers view is under.
That was me. Oh, I was gonna say. Pretty sure I checked all that. Our tour convened today at 3:19.
319.
And all board members were present.
Okay.
I think we're going.
Ta-da! 5:01 p.m.
All right. Okay, so let's call the meeting to order, please. Apologies for those who are online or in the audience for a little late start, but we'll drive forward. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me.
Mr. Chair, I think we need.
Sorry, yeah, I was so excited to get ready. All right. Do the roll call, please.
Board Member Dyer,
Here.
Board Member Goodhue. Here. Board Member Hall.
Here.
Board Member Pomeroy.
Here.
And Chair Croman.
Here. All right. Alice.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any public appearances? Anyone wishing to speak before the board? Seeing none, we'll move to announcements. Any announcements?
I have an announcement. So this year, I think it'll be the 27th the 29th year of the Carmel Heritage Society and AIA Monterey Bay's home tour. It's going to be taking place this year on September 9th, and there's 8 different houses on the tour. And you can go to carmelheritage.org to purchase tickets. You can purchase tickets right now. I think the main website is not quite up yet, where you can see the different houses, but if you buy tickets now, you'll be assured attending and getting a map and a ticket, a brochure which shows all the different houses. And it starts between, I think, 1 and 5 o'clock, and then there's a reception afterwards, as usual, at the First Murphy House. And this year, there's a special evening event we're doing, which is going to be kind of this cocktail party, open bar, open hors d'oeuvres at a really fabulous house, which we can let you know about. We're not really advertising, but it's going to be a smaller event for $150 a person, and that will take place the night before on September 8th, Friday. So again, if you're interested in that, you can go to or email executive director at aiamontereybay.org and get information about that if you haven't already received an invitation. So
Awesome, thank you.
see you there.
So September 9th. Any other announcements?
Just that Marnie has let us know that the level 2 notable home, now called notable home proposal, will probably be on the October council agenda.
Okay, if nothing further, we'll move on to the consent agenda with the adoption of 3 different meetings worth of minutes. So do I have any motions on the May 15th, June 19th, or July 17th meetings?
Can we approve them all at once?
I think.
I move to approve the minutes of all 3 dates.
I'll second.
Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Okay, we'll move to the public hearings now. So the Cypress Inn is our first item under advisement, right?
Jordan, Chair Croman, would you go ahead and read the title for us?
Oh, sure. So it's MA 23-103 Cypress Inn, consideration of making a recommendation to the City Council on Mills Act contract application.
So item number 4, we do need to continue that application.
So do we need to officially recognize that at the meeting?
We just need to recognize that item was,
Okay.
partially noticed and agendized, but due to a lack of complete noticing, we do need to continue it. We do expect to bring it back next month.
So that's MA 23-146 Lopez 5 Northwest LLC. Consideration of adding a historic resource to the Carmel Register and making recommendations to the City Council on the Mills Act application that will be continued to a meeting at a later date.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then let's go to MA 23-103, please.
Excuse me for interrupting, Marnie, don't we need to take a vote on the continuance? No? Okay.
And then Joel, if we could show our PowerPoint.
All right, we're kicking off the evening with application 23-103 for the Cypress Inn. Do you mind doing the slides for me? All right, so the Cypress Inn, originally called La Ribera, is located northeast Lincoln and 7th. It's a Spanish eclectic style hotel constructed in 1929 by the architectural firm Blaine and Olson. And it opened with great fanfare. The Monterey Peninsula Herald described it as one of the showplaces of Monterey Peninsula and easily one of the most outstanding buildings in the county. Here you can see a historic postcard and some early photographs of the hotel. The architects had studied Mediterranean architecture, and they are credited with a number of designs in Santa Barbara. You'll notice that these views are all looking northeast, and that northeast corner here is 1 story, as it was originally. Today it's 2 stories. This is an early photograph of that 2-story addition at the southwest corner of the property. It was built in 1949 by the architect Gardner Daly, a significant architect. Next slide. Just another angle of that addition. This addition was deemed significant in itself because of who the architect was, and it was documented as part of the DPR form. Just one more current view of that addition. Next slide. And now I'd like to talk about another addition. So the images you just saw were of that southwest corner, the green shaded volume. But now I'd like to draw your attention to the red box, which is actually on a separate property. It's a separate APN number, a separate lot. And in 1999, the city approved this addition, and it was completed in 2003. So initially that north lot featured a historic building, the Mary Danielle Morgan Studio. However, that building didn't have integrity, so it was allowed to be demolished and replaced with this addition. The addition is interconnected with the hotel and serves as part of the hotel, but the lots were never merged. Next slide. This is the view looking from Lincoln Street of the addition. It's designed in a compatible way, but with some differentiation. Here's the original rendering. So you can see it's called an addition in the architectural plan set and functioned as an addition. But again, it is on a separate legal lot of record. Next slide. Here is just a floor plan of that addition. And again, It is interconnected and functions as part of the hotel. Next slide. So the Cypress Inn was added to the register back in 1999 when, as I mentioned, that studio was demolished and the plans for this addition were being created. The property owners also entered into a historic preservation conservation easement that was recorded in 2003, and the easement includes both the original hotel property and that north lot, and ensured that the facades of the buildings would be protected. And then in 2005, it was added to our historic inventory, and then a couple years later, recorded with the county. So tonight, we're not asking for it to be added to the Carmel Register. It already is added. The easement was provided as an attachment to your staff report. Next slide. And as you're all familiar, the Mills Act is a historical property contract. It's an incentive program for properties that are listed on the Carmel Register. And you enter into the agreement with a reduction in property tax, agreeing to rehabilitate, maintain, and preserve the resource. And there are 5 findings that our code lays out. The first is that the building is listed on the inventory and on the register. So the Cypress Inn meets those criteria, again, added to the register first and then the inventory. As you can see here, it's been recorded more than once over the years. This is one of the city's most significant buildings. There have been a couple different DPR forms, all reaching the conclusion that it is significant. And it was added to the register earlier than most buildings were added to the register in Carmel. Finding 2 is that the rehabilitation and maintenance plan is appropriate in scope and sufficient in detail, and is more significant than just routine maintenance for any property. So the applicant has submitted a plan of just over $1 million in work that will be carried out over the next 10 years. And the next few slides, I'll go through some of their work plan items. Go ahead, Marnie. So there is a 3-story tower that flanks the central courtyard. And as you can see in the photos, there is some pretty significant plaster cracking that needs repair. They're also planning to do plumbing repairs of the water and sewer pipes throughout the building to remedy some issues they're having. They also have several ADA work items planned, particularly at the gate on 7th. They'll be replacing the boiler and the water softener. Also planned electrical upgrades for the building. They'll be repainting the entire exterior. You can see some staining at the exterior. It will remain white. And then they're planning to repair and rehabilitate the windows. These are not the original windows themselves. They are steel frame windows, though, that we will first repair, and only where repair is not feasible would replacement be permitted. And this would all be done under a permit. Just to clarify, the maintenance plan items are something that the property owner is committing to, but the work will be permitted as it comes up in the plan over the next 10 years. They'll also be doing roof repairs and replacement where necessary. There's a very unique clay tile mission style roof with wood beams supporting the tiles, and the clay tiles extend past the roof eave in an irregular manner. So it's a very unique character defining feature that is in need of repair. And then moving on to finding 3, which talks about past and future alterations. So alterations that have already happened and that will happen need to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. They need to not significantly alter, damage, or diminish the primary elevation or character defining features. And then they cannot increase floor area on the property by more than 15% beyond the amount established in the documented original or historic design of the resource. And then this doesn't apply in this case because it's not a 1-story building, but you can't put a 2nd story on a 1-story resource. So Bullet 3 is the item to look at here. As I mentioned, there was 2 additions, one at the southwest corner built in 1949. And that addition is over 50 years. It was by a noted California architect, and it was documented as significant. And then that north addition, which was approved in 1999, built in 2003, is located on a wholly separate property with a different APN that was never merged with the original hotel. So in staff's reading of the code, property means legal property. And so this is something the board can discuss this evening, but the staff recommendation is that that north addition is not a disqualifier. Here's just an aerial view of the 2 different lots I'm referencing. And then, of course, planned rehabilitation work is also found to be compliant with the standards and will be permitted as the work plan items come up. Finding 4 reads that the Mills Act contract will aid in offsetting the costs of rehabilitating and maintaining the historic resource. So the property owner will receive a reduction in tax liability, typically between 40 to 60%, though that varies year to year. It can be much lower, and it's set by the county. And the idea is that the funds saved will be reallocated to the work plan projects. And this work plan estimates over $1 million of work over the next 10 years. And then finding 5, approval of the contract will represent an equitable balance between public and private interests and will not result in a substantial adverse financial impact to the city. So while there will be a reduction in the tax revenue, the city does receive the remaining portion, and the value of historic preservation offsets the loss of revenue. There's also a requirement that the city not approve more than 15 Mills Act contracts in any 3-year period. So for our 3-year period, we're going back to 2020, 2021. Those years didn't see any Mills Act contracts. Last year, the city approved 4 contracts. Earlier in 2023, 1 was approved. And then this evening and next month, you'll be hearing a total of 4. So we are well under that 15 contract threshold for any rolling 3-year period. So with that, the staff recommendation is to enter into a Mills Act contract with the property owner for the historic La Rabera Hotel. And we have the architect who compiled the maintenance plan with us this evening.
Question,
Yes.
Catherine. I think it'd be interesting, do you know, maybe the city knows, the formula the county uses to figure out what will be the reduction?
It's a complex formula, and we did have a representative from the county join us earlier this year when the city council was reviewing the Mills Act policy. Staff came to them with a number of questions like, would you like to put a cap on the property values eligible for this program? Or would you like to change the number that the city contracts approved? So we did have someone from the assessor come, and that's recorded if you'd like to watch that recording, but it is pretty complex. The city can't do it in advance, and it's really in the county's hands. I'm not sure if Marnie, you have anything to add to that.
No, just to reiterate, it is quite complex. But if the board would like, when we bring these contracts forward to you, we can show you what the base formula is, just with the understanding that we cannot do the calculation, but we can tell you what the different components are if you're interested.
I think that'd be interesting just to have that in the public record maybe once again so that people watching can understand how that's done. I mean, it does sound like trying to get a building permit fee from the county, which is the same complexity. I think you can never estimate it in advance.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll open it up for discussion within the board. And if we want to hear from the representative, maybe we want to do that first. Go ahead. Either way.
Good evening. And I want to thank staff and the board for the time to present this. It's, obviously a wonderful property. I always tend to think of the Mills Act applications as sort of a portfolio that the jurisdiction kind of manages in some ways. I think this particular property is obviously a manifest historic parcel, and I wanted to second our agreement with the staff in terms of the nature of the additions that have happened over time. I think there was an earlier question about, how does an addition get considered historic or not beyond the old 50-year rule? And typically, what I see from the historic communities, they define a period of significance that applies to that building, and that anything within that period of significance would be considered a historic addition. Anything outside of that would be past. And so in this particular property, I think we're very frankly a bit lucky that all the newer addition happened on a separate parcel, and the older addition remained on what I'll call the historic parcel. The owner does get 2 separate property bills for each parcel, and so there'll be the Mills Act would only apply to the parcel that has the older portion of the building on there. So in some ways, if you look at it as an entire building, they'd be foregoing the savings on the addition. That's the non-historic portion. And then in response to the earlier question, I couldn't do the formula either, but I've done quite a few Mills Acts now, and generally the tax savings boils down to anywhere from half to 2/3 of your original tax bills. So you'd be paying, anywhere from, 50% to 66 2/3 less than you were before. So it's a substantial savings for the owner. In the case of the Cypress Inn, I think it's well warranted, because older hotels like this, I think, are at a bit of a competitive disadvantage with a newer hotel. They're working with very aged infrastructure. In the case of the Cypress Inn, the boiler room to me looks like something from a World War II sub. It really needs a lot of work, even from the standpoint of occupant comfort and safety, even in some cases, plus the benefits of energy savings. So I think a program like the Mills Act is very well suited for that hotel, and on behalf of the hotel, I would certainly say we appreciate the city's consideration of this application, and I'm free for any questions that come up.
Any questions? I have one question. In your maintenance plan, for the first year, you have the fire alarm upgrades at $60,000, and then it's not until 2027 that you have the ADA upgrades. And since this is in some ways a public building, wouldn't it be wiser to move that? I mean, you have $110,000 that second year for window repair. Wouldn't it be wiser to move that up?
Potentially. The fire alarm upgrades is put first because we actually have an active issue with that right now. So usually with ADA, and to be honest, I haven't done the full ADA analysis, but we did get a CASP report, which is the California Access Specialist report, and it's well over 100 pages long. So most likely, this is probably oversimplifying it. We'll probably take care of the worst issues first, or the low-hanging fruit, as they say, and then when you get to something like an elevator upgrade, which can be really quite expensive, just try to part of it's based on how much of a war chest the hotel can build up for these remodels, because they've in some sense the income's fairly fixed. They can only get so much revenue from so many guests coming through. So I presented this restoration plan to them as well, as so they could start budgeting for this. So with regards to this, the applicant would probably have some ability to move things around, and if necessary, bring it back in front of the city. I believe it's every 5 or 7 years that the staff will take another look at where we are with all those.
Okay, thanks for that.
I have a question about the ADA entrance.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lovely wrought iron gate there, I believe. Will that be able to be saved and used?
Yeah, that would be considered part of the historic fabric. So you can do, there's a lot of tricks you can do, even like auto operators, even if a gate's not currently accessible. But I do think there's some other ways to resolve that without needing to do, rely on technology. I'd like to keep it as authentic an experience as possible. Fortunately, the dog shower just inside there doesn't need to be accessible, so we're okay there. But yeah, that's another one of my favorite features, even though that's not historic. And I know I'm pandering to the sole dog on the board, right?
Any other questions? Are there any people outside the board that would like to speak on this issue or ask any questions?
Can you see any hands raised on Zoom? Can you see Zoom at all? Okay.
Okay, so hearing none, thank you very much for your time. So does anyone want to make a motion on the MA 23-103?
I can make a few comments.
Oh, sure.
First of all, just to reiterate what we've said all along with the Mills Act is that's one of the very few incentives for historic preservation the city or any government has. So I think it, in general, should be encouraged for the qualifying properties. It's also, the maintenance plan is really the only way the city has to assure that, what should be extensive work is done. There's no guarantees without a Mills Act that a person with an historic property needs to do anything in terms of the maintenance or anything else. So, having an historic property like the Pine Inn, which is really a landmark for Carmel, and the fact that their maintenance plan is well over $1 million, I think is is legitimate to me in terms of what should be approved for a Mills Act.
You meant Cypress Inn,
Yeah,
Pine Inn.
yeah.
Right.
I was like, what's
Cypress Inn.
happening with the Pine Inn?
Sorry, yeah, nothing. But yeah, the Cypress Inn, and yeah, no, I think it's an important thing. I guess I would just note the new addition. I see that, like staff agrees, is a distinct property.
Yeah.
It clearly is distinct when you see it from the street. It was done per the Secretary's interior standards, obviously. So I would agree with that recommendation from staff that it should not be considered part of the Pine Inn that you would look at as a 15% addition.
I agree. Yep. Got Pine Inn on the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if there's, I'm sorry,
Go ahead, please.
I think there's any building that deserves to be preserved and maintained well. I think this is one of the top.
Yeah.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Go ahead, please.
I move that MA 23-103, Cypress Inn, be recommended to the City Council for approval of the Mills Act contract.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Have a vote, please.
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
Yes?
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Okay, we'll go to the next item on the public hearings, MA 23-116, Esperanza Carmel, consideration of a recommendation to the City Council on Mills Act contract for the historic Miss Clinton Walker House.
Thank you. Good morning. So the Mrs. Clinton Walker House, also known as Cabin on the Rocks, is located at 26336 Scenic Road. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, as most everyone knows. He designed the building in 1948 to 1950, and then the building was constructed in 1951 to 52 by Miles Bain and Walter Olds for the original owner, who was a widow, Mrs. Della Clinton Walker. The building was designed in the organic architectural style, also sometimes referred to as Usonian or now Wrightian. And there's also a significant landscape design on the property by Thomas Church. So I had to just add this in because it's so fascinating. The correspondence between the client and the architect started in 1945, and the owner wrote, "I own a rocky point of land in Carmel, California, extending into the Pacific Ocean. The surface is flat, located at the end of a white sand beach. I'm a woman living alone. I wish protection from wind and privacy from the road, and a house as enduring as the rocks, but as transparent and charming as the waves, and as delicate as the seashore. You are the only man who can do this. Will you help me?" And Frank Lloyd Wright responded, "Dear Mrs. Walker, I liked your letter, brief and to the point." And that kicked off their working relationship. And the client was familiar with falling water. Frank Lloyd Wright's one of the most famous homes in Pennsylvania for an ocean. So the Frank Lloyd Wright house here in Carmel is his only seaside home, so it's really quite significant. Here you can see some early sketches that Wright did and the floor plan. The building is remarkably intact. There's been one addition that I'll talk about in a few slides, but you can see here an irregular floor plan described as almost like an arrow or a fish shape, and it is distinguished by a triangular shaped prow at the front jutting out over the ocean in the style of a ship's prow. Here you can see it from above. That the graphic on the right shows the addition, kind of the right or the north fishtail, I'll describe it as. I'll talk more about that addition shortly. Here are just some photos I found that I just thought were so fascinating of that ship's prow being constructed out of concrete and stone. And interestingly, Wright had proposed a desert stone initially, like at his Taliesin West property, and then had the sense to use Carmel stone instead. So it's an entirely Carmel stone ship's prow with the stonework done by a local stonemason. The black and white photo is just after the home was completed. I'm just kind of giving you a quick tour of the home before I get into the maintenance plan items, so you're familiar with the property. This is what's referred to as the bedroom wing loggia, and it has redwood French doors and diagonal redwood wind screens. And then there's a prominent hexagonal shaped living room with the panoramic glazing overlooking that ship's prow. You see the original owner there pictured at the bottom right. And the windows have a very unique inverse stepped three-tiered system. They're steel windows painted in one of Wright's signature colors, Cherokee red. And then there's a kitchen door, which Wright did not wish to include, but the owner insisted that this was very important to her, that she be able to take her trash out. So. And then another very unique feature is, it's not just the bedroom windows, but windows throughout actually feature this wood venting system where you can kind of slide the vent open and close as needed without opening a full window, letting in all that damaging sea air. So the windows have needed work over the years. In 2010, the front living room windows were replaced. You can see the corrosion here. So even though the longtime property owners had been grinding down the paint and repainting every few years, there was still just too much damage, and they did need to be replaced in kind. And that process was documented with before and after photos on the left and right. They were able to do a really great job. More work is now proposed, so this can be a model of what can be done elsewhere throughout the house. And then this is our standout fireplace, our full height fireplace that also projects through the roof line. And then the floor. So interestingly, Wright envisioned a green slate floor, but what was put in was a red tinted concrete with an inscribed hexagonal pattern. So at the interior, there's copper tube radiant heating. And then to the roof, Wright always envisioned a copper roof. However, in the 50s, due to Korean War copper restrictions, what was installed instead was a ceramic glazed roof. You can't quite see the detail there in the photo, but that's the original product, Ludovici Celadon, or however you pronounce that. And then by the 50s, that roof was leaking, so it was replaced with copper. And then again in 1997, it was replaced with the existing copper roof. We also have a driveway gate in a trapezoidal pattern. This exact feature dates to 1999, but it was built to Wright's original specification. So the gate is part of the historic property. And you can also see, next slide, Marnie, an urn on top of one of the gate stone support columns. And this urn was originally filled with blue-green tinted glass illuminated spheres. We also have a fence along Scenic. That fence was built in 2001 to Wright's specifications again. So I mentioned an addition, and there is an addition. After the home was complete in 52, the owner requested a studio for her crafting and weaving. So Frank Lloyd Wright did design her a studio in 56. Wright passed away in 1959, and then his studio plan was expanded upon by Mrs. Walker's grandson, Sandy Walker, and it was ultimately built as a master bedroom, but it was closely based on Wright's design. So that bedroom addition dates to 1960-61. Here's some photos of the master bedroom. Very much in style of the rest of the home and opening out onto that north side. And then the mermaid sculpture by Robert Howard was acquired in 1964 by the property owner. As you'd imagine, there have been and continue to be erosion issues. In 2016, the city approved a 63-foot long bluff top retaining wall. However, the Coastal Commission identified issues with the application, and ultimately the applicant withdrew. And then in 2018, the prow stone wall of the house was repaired. So as we've just discussed with the previous application, the Mills Act is an incentive program for properties on the Carmel Register. This property is already listed on the register and additionally on the California and national registers. Go ahead. So we're going to go through those 5 findings again. The first one is that it's already on the register. A DPR form was recorded in 2001, and then it was in 2016 when it was added to the register. Finding 2, the proposed rehabilitation and maintenance plan is appropriate in scope and detail, and they're proposing just over $1.3 million in work over the next 10 years. I'll go through some of their work plan items. So I have them here bulleted, and I have some photos on the next slide that we'll go through. So again, there are more windows that need repairing. This is just a very vulnerable location for steel windows. So we have that model from 2010 of how it can be done, and that would be permitted work. And then next slide shows some of the stone repair that needs to be done. You can see some cracking and flaking of the Carmel stone. And then the existing copper roof. This photo shows the existing condition, which is going to need work as well within the next 10 years. We also have our Thomas Church designed landscape, which involves gravel and large boulders and other native coastal plants. Finding 3 talks about past and planned work. So that 1960s master bedroom addition is most definitely part of the documented historic design. And then all planned work will also be evaluated against the Secretary's standards, and nothing is currently proposed that would alter or diminish it or increase the floor area, or certainly not a second-story addition. Finding 4, again, talks about that the contract offsetting the costs. So the property owner will receive a tax reduction, and those funds will be reallocated to these work plan items, again totaling just about 1.3 million. Finding 5, as I've mentioned, we are well under the 15 contract threshold within 3 years. The city will still be receiving a portion of the tax revenue. The city receives 6% of what the property owner pays. And it did just change hands earlier this year, so that tax revenue is substantially higher this year. And that's it for me. Staff recommends entering into a Mills Act contract with the property owner for the Della Clinton Walker House.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Questions for Catherine?
No questions from me.
Okay. Do we want to hear from the representative again?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chris Mitchell. I'm Managing Director of Esperanza Carmel LLC. We're the new owners of the property. I'm here today to present to the Historic Resources Board the Frank Lloyd Wright Cabin on the Rocks house for consideration for the Mills Act, as I'm certain everyone will be familiar with both the architect and the house. However, I'll briefly describe both. Frank Lloyd was an American architect. He had an impressive career spanning 70 years and is widely regarded as the greatest American architect of all time, if not in the world. The Cabin on the Rocks, as Catherine said, is his only beachfront property, so particularly special in that respect. The house was commissioned by Mrs. Della Clinton Walker, who was a childhood friend of Frank Lloyd Wright, we believe, in June 1945. Construction was completed in 1952, and then later enlarged in 1956. I was going to read the letter, but as it's already read, I'll save you some time. So the response to the letter was to design a house to resemble a ship's bow on the water, making use of the reef. The fact that it still stands today pretty much exactly as constructed in the 1950s is a testament to his brilliance. Delia Walker enjoyed the house for the rest of her life, and it remained under the excellent stewardship of her family until the recent sale to Esperanza Carmel in February of this year. We are, as the new stewards, committed to the long-term rehabilitation, maintenance, and preservation of this very special property. Again, I think it was covered already, but it's on the National Register, the California Register, as well as the Carmel-by-the-Sea's Historic Register, listed as the Mrs. Clinton Walker House, whereas often it's referred to as Cabin on the Rocks. As you're all aware, the house was previously considered and approved for the Mills Act by the previous ownership about 2 years ago. They didn't proceed to have it formalised for whatever reason. So not to be too repetitious, but as I said, we're committed to restoring and maintaining this important property, not just for Carmel, but it is also widely regarded as one of Frank Lloyd Wright's most impressive properties as well, and it's in difficult company this evening, but arguably one of Carmel's most historic properties, if not the most. I'd like to thank Marnie Waffle, Catherine Wallace, and the rest of the city for the helping consider this application. Myself, along with our historic expert, Chris Barlow, are here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, any questions for Mr. Mitchell? Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Discussion amongst the board?
Is there anyone on Zoom with their hand raised? No.
We can't tell. Okay. All right. Bring it back to the board then. Any comments?
This looks like another sure thing. I mean, the maintenance that's required on this house is absolutely unbelievable. It's, I think, the Mills Act was probably designed for places like this.
Yes, and to ditto Eric's prior comments about the Cypress Inn, I think we're just fortunate to have the Mills Act to be able to save and restore these beautiful old historic places.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I said about the Cypress Inn. You know, the maintenance plan is the only way we can really guarantee that this amazingly extensive maintenance is going to be done. I mean, again, it's just for a comparison. I don't know how many square feet the Cypress Inn is, but the cabin on the rocks is what, 1,200 square feet? Or 1,400. 1,400 square feet, and they're spending more money in 10 years on this house than they would be spending in the entire Cypress Inn for 10 years. So that says a lot, and if they can support the bank and get the Coastal Commission to go along with it, they might throw that in as well. So it's a lot. I guess I'd make a couple more comments about perhaps what would be questioning some people is that there's nothing in the Historic Preservation Ordinance about the Mills Act regarding financial need. We all know the owners are, you know, have spent a lot of money on a lot of different properties in town, but there's nothing in there that allows us to use that as a criterion for establishing the Mills Act. And in terms, the one finding that's in the Mills Act is that relates to that is basically finding this equitable balance of public and private interests and will not result in substantial adverse financial impact on the city. And when I look at that, I think, Catherine, you mentioned 6% of the total property tax in a year goes to the city. And considering this is such a prominent property on the beach, everyone sees it, thousands of people see it every day and walk by it every day. I think I remember how much it was sold for. I think that puts the property tax the city gets, even without the Mills Act, at about $13,000 a year or something like that. And you know, with this maintenance plan, we get over 1.3 million, if not more, because some of this work may even cost more than they anticipate. So I see it as a very worthwhile and financially and something that's worth using the Mills Act for.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're fortunate to have people who are great stewards of properties like this, as we've seen by the previous owners, and obviously the new owners are very committed to doing the same thing, and I agree. The Mills Act is a great accessory. Doesn't give them everything they need, but it does give them something, which is great. Okay, so with that being said, is there a motion on this item?
I'll move to recommend that the city grant a Mills Act for the cabin on the rocks in this application.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes?
Board Member Hall,
Yes?
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
Chair Croman.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to MA 23117 Griffin, consideration for adding a historic resource to the Carmel Register, Mills Act contract for the Agnes Shorting House. And because this is in my catchment area, I have to recuse myself. So I ask Carol, the vice chair, to take, or the vice chair to take over, and I will step out.
So, go ahead.
All right, we have Mills Act application 23-117 for the Griffin property. It is historically known as the Agnes Shorting House for the original owner, but it's also known as the birdhouse because there are lovely birdhouses all over the property. It's located on 3rd Avenue to northwest of Junipero. It's an English cottage-style residence constructed in 1927 with a detached thermotite garage. If anyone isn't familiar, that's a local concrete building material manufactured in Carmel. It's pretty rare, and there are just a few residential examples of it. And the cottage was designed by a significant architect, Frederick Bigland. The birdhouse is already on the historic inventory. It was added in 2005 and recorded with the county. Here you're looking at the front entry of the cottage. And as we've discussed this evening, you must be on the Carmel Register to obtain the benefits like the Mills Act contract. And this property is not yet on the Carmel Register, unlike the Cypress Inn and the Frank Lloyd Wright House. So this evening, you'll be passing a resolution to add the property to the register, if you so choose. We've been over this in our previous presentations. We can move on to the next slide. So to go through those 5 findings, the building is a historic resource. It's not yet listed on the register, and the property owner is requesting that we add it this evening. Finding 2 talks about that maintenance, rehabilitation and maintenance plan, sufficient in scope and detail. And the next slide, we're looking at about $250,000 over the next 10 years. This is a very small cottage, but there are still significant work items planned. Next slide. One being our Carmel stone exterior fireplace, which just has typical cracking and requires a mortar repair, so it'll be inspected and repaired as needed. The cottage foundation will also be inspected and repaired as needed. You see here there's a cement stucco cladding on the cottage. There's also plan to do exterior painting as needed. This picture here shows that detached garage on the left. And then window repair, not replacement, just repair. So we have a mix of windows. Some may be original, some do not appear to be original, but all are wood. And so they're all would have been in keeping with the Secretary's standards. And then the property owner is also proposing to do door repair as needed. The image on the left is the front door with that kind of unique pointed arch shape. And then there's also a non-original Dutch door on the side elevation as a side entry. The property owner is proposing to rehabilitate and install all of the original shutters. So we have some already up on the house, these 2 pictured here, and there's more in storage in the garage that the property owner is proposing to rehab and put up throughout the cottage. That was the only flower box intact, but the original shutters will go up throughout. And then we have our kind of unique rolled eave roof form. It's a pyramidal roof form with the rolled eaves designed to mimic like a thatched English cottage, a thatched grass roof or something. And so right now we have these thin black composite shingles, and so the property owner is proposing to replace it with something that looks, that is more compatible with the cottage style. They've identified necessary repair work to the Carmel stone entry wall and this low stone lined planter. There's also stone features, a stoop at the front door, and a little bench feature, also showing some loose rocks that need to be stabilized. And then there are Carmel stone walkways throughout the property that will be repaired as needed. Additionally, there are just concrete walkways, which are not historic. And the applicant has described that these concrete walkways will be removed and replaced with a Carmel stone compatible walkway. So moving on to finding 3, which talks about the past and future alterations. There was a 1937 addition on the cottage. It was very small, 85 square feet, extended the south elevation 7 feet south. So that addition now, not only was it less than 15% of the original floor area, but now it's over 50 years old, and it was documented in the DPR form as an architecturally compatible change.
Do we know if that was the original architect that did the addition, or is there no record of that?
I don't know who the architect of the addition was, but it was within 10 years, just about 10 years after, the addition came 10 years after the cottage itself. And nothing in the proposed work raises red flags about diminishing the historic resource, increasing floor area, or of course going up to a second story. Here is a plan of the addition, but it doesn't have an architect name on it. So you can see that shaded part at the south portion of the house, what is the addition. And then finding 4 talks about how the contract will benefit the owner and the cost will go towards maintaining the resource. As we talked about, the property owner would receive approximately 40 to 60%, though that varies and is set by the county, and those funds will go towards these rehabilitation projects. And finding 5, those projects are estimated to cost about $250,000 over the next 10 years. There will be a reduction in tax revenue to the city, but we are well within our 15 contract limit, and we will still be receiving a remaining portion of the tax revenue, 6% of their tax bill, and the value of historic preservation offsets the loss in revenue. And with that, staff does recommend that the Historic Resources Board add this property to the Carmel Register and recommend to the City Council that they enter into the Mills Act contract for this property. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions of Catherine on the board? Anyone on Zoom? And the architect, do you have anything you'd like to say?
First off, thank you, Kath, for another excellent presentation there. I always learn something in your presentations, which is wonderful. This project actually is a real special one to me. I always believe as an architect that every once in a while you find the right house with the right owner. And, given the overheated real estate market, when I have somebody who comes in and says, I have this historic home, I want it to stay exactly as it is, I love it, it really speaks to me about something that seems to be lost in a lot of our cityscapes these days. To me, this is the type of house you'd only find in Carmel. It's, the quaint English style of it pulls at me a bit because I'm half English myself, but it's that, in the sense of that portfolio I mentioned earlier, I think it's very important not to lose the modestly scaled houses with the grand hotels and the great, masterpieces out there. This is also a masterpiece, but I'd argue that it's part of its success is in its ability to be modestly scaled. As you saw in the field trip today, there's sort of bigger hotels starting to encroach around it, and I think just the aspect of this house with the lovely landscaping, the birdhouses, which technically aren't part of the historicity of the house, but they are just one of those place-making spots. I think it would be a valuable addition. There's this total work plan isn't quite as large as some of the other ones we've seen, but it's also, the house isn't quite as large, and it certainly isn't, I hope, not a $22 million house like the last one. But I think there's really the fact that the owner's scouring all parts of the country looking for hinges for the historic shutters, looking for the correct type of grout to use on the Carmel stone. This really is, to me, the case of a proper pairing and another perfect fit for the Mills Act. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions. The owner's also listening in on Zoom there, so I'm speaking on their behalf. But I think really with that, really the same types of problems that you see on houses of this age. Plumbing repairs are always, frankly, speaking as an owner of an older house myself, are always a killer. That's, easily going to be the first cost that tends to be a real hit for the new homeowners. And also just bringing some of the landscaping in kind so this house can really get back to its original state.
I have one question.
Sure.
I'm a little puzzled. Those windows, the shutters seem to be very narrow. So do they actually hinge out to cover the window? I mean, that you would need hinges for those shutters. Just a curiosity.
Yeah, there's actually I haven't personally got to see the whole complement of shutters, but I know the owner's got the original shutters in the garage there. So
But
I'm
there
not
was-
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if
There was
those.
original shutters on the house,
Yes,
I think.
yeah, that's correct. So
Yeah.
that's, so I wish I could answer that, but I'll look forward to seeing myself if, when I get to
All
it.
right, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I was curious, is there any documentation at all about what the roof used to be?
Oh, in terms of the original material before the asphalt shingle?
Yeah, was there any historic photographs or anything? Because it just seems like it's such a prominent feature, and then we're sort of guessing.
It is guesswork. My thought would be based on similar properties I've seen in Carmel that would be a very thin type of wood shake, and that those are really tricky to get through insurers these days. And so I think that's when the transition to the asphalt type of shingle was done. But it would most likely have been, a non-treated wood product on that.
Okay. And then can you talk about the window restoration a little bit? I wasn't sure, looking at it, what was really the original windows and what weren't. And so I'm curious, you only have $20,000 or something on that, so I'm curious what you're...
Yeah, a lot of times with this type of rehabilitation, we're really looking at dry rot, where you've got windows that the sills tend to accumulate water, and you get dry rot on the bottom sill. Usually, it's not a replacement, and that's why we go with the rehabilitation term. Is that you're looking for?
So even the ones that aren't maybe original, you're not going
We
That's what I guess I'm curious about. Is there a clear idea about which ones are original and which one's not? And if they're not, what do you do with those?
well,
For example, I'll just
Yeah.
get my.
yeah.
So that mean putting, for example, the screens on the outside of them
Yeah.
is obviously not. Those are new screens and kind of destroys any historic look it may have.
Yeah.
So are those planned to be removed, or how are those being handled?
Well, a lot of these we do work with the owners to see exactly what their needs are, but my recommendation would be in the case of something like a screen, you can buy the aftermarket, screen inserts. A lot of times that's usually where I like to go. It also depends on whether the owners are completely averse to having insects in the house. I used to have the theory if you leave the windows on both sides of the house, the same flies that go in go out. But with the case of something that would be obviously a historic, like a vinyl window, we would move to replace that with a wood type of window that would be compatible with the older style windows.
I think having the screens on the inside is probably what we'd want to see. Maybe that needs to be implemented into the maintenance plan.
Yeah, and the other thing I always like to stress with these maintenance plans is that it's really these are not the final stage. This is the start of a conversation with this board, with staff, with the homeowners, that we do check on, and again, I believe it's every 5 to 7 years. So those types of, like for example, if we have a window restoration project for the house, that would go back in front of, at least on the staff level, and if there were larger questions with that, back in front of you all, just to make sure we're following that plan correctly.
Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you. Comments?
I think we have a wonderful.
We have
So,
does the owner want to say anything, or just, the owner's online, anybody want to comment?
There's someone on chat too. He doesn't have his hand raised.
Okay.
Anyone on Zoom would like to speak? Go ahead.
I think today we've seen a wonderful mix of historic buildings in Carmel. And it's a delight to see this little house, which is another aspect of what we have here. And I think it's, it's great. And I also think that the staff report has been absolutely incredible. I'm just fascinated with all the detail that was put into that.
That's good work. Any other comments before a motion is forwarded?
I guess this one I'm a little on the fence about because of the, one of the criterion for the, or the findings for the Mills Act is that not be just routine maintenance. And some of this does seem to veer toward that. And for example, in the roof, I wish there was more documentation about what the roof was, for example. It would be great to restore it to its original entity. Again, there doesn't seem there to be a lot of study about the windows. So I think I'd rather see some review of that before we approve the maintenance plan in the Mills Act.
We can include that in our motion, right? That it come back to us to make sure that it's more than just maintenance.
So what you're doing this afternoon is making a recommendation to the city council. And so you can recommend that the maintenance plan be revised before the council takes action on the contract. Just know that when the work is scheduled to be done, it will go back through our design review process to make sure that all the work is done in accordance with the Secretary's standards.
So indeed, that is a way of assuring that it will be done correctly.
Yes.
Which is great, but it doesn't assure that the work will be done in the first place. Because you have to, in other words, the stuff that's in the maintenance plan seems to me needs to be specified, otherwise they're not obligated to do it. They have to do it in the right way if they're going to do it, but.
Correct. So are there some items that you would like to see included that you feel are not covered in the maintenance plan, or?
Mainly the window details I was talking about, I guess. There's exterior door windows assessment and repair. There's like $250 per year, which doesn't seem like it may be adequate for what may need to be done. So. So I guess I'm asking for the maintenance plan to be revised so that that could be more specifically laid out.
And like interior screens, or what other issues?
That would be an important part of it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We could do it with the condition that the screens be interior if there are screens.
Of course, there could have been just the way good old-fashioned screens used to be, a wood frame and some screening.
These were pretty obviously later, I think, because I looked at them.
Sure,
Yeah.
So one option is to just spell out exactly what we would like to see, so that they don't have to come back, and the council has a clear idea of whether to approve it or not with those conditions, right, Marnie?
Correct.
Okay, so I think an evaluation of the existing windows and whether any need to be, if they're not original, considered what would make them more compatible with the original windows, and of course the screen issue be part of it.
Do you want to make a motion, Eric, to that effect then?
Does anyone else have any more comments, or? I certainly can. So I'll make a motion to recommend to the City Council to approve the Mills Act contract, which I don't have this.
For MA 23117?
MA 23.
We need to get it on the register first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, yeah.
so I make a motion to, sorry, thank you. Get this in front of me. So I'll make a motion that MA 23117 Griffin, that property be placed on the City of Carmel's Historic Register, and recommend to the City Council to approve a Mills Act contract for the application with the conditions that the windows be evaluated, and whatever the result of that evaluation be accommodated into the maintenance plan, as well as making sure that the screens that are now on the front of the house be at the very least removed or put on the interior as part of that window upgrade and restoration.
All right, is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. Roll call?
Board Member Dyer,
Yes.
Board Member Goodhue,
Yes?
Board Member Hall,
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy,
Yes.
and Chair Croman is recused.
All right. Next regular meeting is September 18th.
Do we want to invite Chair Croman to come back in?
Jordan? He gets to adjourn. You get to adjourn the meeting, Jordan.
Awesome.
Those directions.
Okay, do we have any future agenda items? Did we already go over that?
No.
No? Any future agenda items? Okay, then our next regular meeting will be September 18th, and we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Did you want to say anything?
Oh, sorry. I just skipped right over you.
No problem. Actually, it's a brief report this afternoon. As Board Member Hall mentioned, we are planning on taking the Level 2 Notable Homes proposal to the City Council tentatively in October. And then just also a reminder, this Wednesday, the Planning Commission's having a special meeting on the wireless communications facility ordinance. And they'll be making a recommendation on that ordinance to the City Council. So that will start at 5 p.m. Here at City Hall. And you'll also be able to participate via Zoom if you'd like. And that's all I have.
Thank you. All right, we stand adjourned then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.